Have you ever wondered why the life you say you want can feel strangely uncomfortable the moment it starts getting close? That question unsettles most people because it challenges a comforting illusion, the idea that desire alone is enough. You may think you are fully ready for love, abundance, success, peace, or recognition. You may even visualize it, pray for it, work for it, and speak about it with conviction. But what if a deeper part of you is still interpreting that very reality as unsafe? This is where everything begins to change. Not in your circumstances, not in the outer world, but inside the invisible system that decides what feels familiar, what feels threatening, and what you are actually able to hold. Many people do not fail because they are unlucky. They fail because their nervous system has been conditioned to trust stress more than ease, longing more than fulfillment, and struggle more than receiving. So when life begins to open, something in them tightens. They overthink. They pull away. They sabotage. They return to the emotional climate they know how to survive. And here is the deeper truth most people never hear. Your reality is not shaped only by what you want. It is shaped by what your body believes is safe enough to become real. What if the very moment your life begins to improve is the exact moment your system tries to pull you back? This is the paradox almost no one sees clearly. You meet someone who genuinely sees you, and suddenly you feel the urge to withdraw. You begin to earn more, and almost instinctively you spend it, delay it, or disrupt the flow. You get closer to the very thing you asked for, and something inside you creates distance. It doesn't feel logical. It feels confusing, even frustrating. But beneath that confusion, there is a precise mechanism at work. Your nervous system is not designed to make you happy. It is designed to keep you familiar. If love once felt unpredictable, you learn to associate intimacy with risk. If success brought pressure or judgment, expansion became something your body resists. If peace was rare, chaos became your baseline. And so, even when your conscious mind says, "This is what I want," your body quietly asks, "Is this safe?" And if the answer is no, it will act, subtly, automatically, convincingly. Not to hurt you, but to protect the version of reality it knows how to manage. This is why self-sabotage is rarely self-destruction. It is self-protection, operating with outdated instructions. And until those instructions are seen, questioned, and gently rewritten, your life will continue to orbit what feels familiar, not what is truly possible. If this is resonating with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this message reach the people who need it most. Why does something that should feel good sometimes feel strangely uncomfortable? This is where the illusion begins to break. We are taught to believe that happiness, love, and ease are naturally welcomed experiences. But for many people, the opposite is true. Not because they don't deserve it, but because their system has never learned how to live inside it. If your emotional baseline was built around tension, pressure, or unpredictability, then calm can feel unfamiliar. And what feels unfamiliar often gets interpreted as unsafe. So instead of relaxing into peace, your body subtly searches for what's wrong. It scans, questions, anticipates, waiting for something to disrupt the stillness. Have you ever noticed how some people feel restless when everything is finally okay? They create problems where there were none. They overanalyze situations that were simple. They turn clarity into confusion. Not consciously, but automatically, because their system is trying to return to what it recognizes. This is the hidden addiction to emotional patterns. Not an addiction to pain, but to familiarity. And this is where most people get stuck without realizing it. They believe they are seeking a better life, but their internal state is continuously recreating the same emotional environment they've always known. So the question becomes, are you truly uncomfortable because something is wrong? Or because something is finally different? What if your life is not reflecting what you desire, but what your nervous system has practiced the most? This idea shifts everything because it removes the illusion that reality is random. Instead, it reveals a deeper pattern, one that operates quietly beneath your intentions. You may consciously aim for growth, connection, and expansion, yet still find yourself surrounded by the same types of situations, the same emotional dynamics, the same internal reactions. Why does this repetition happen? Because your nervous system is constantly calibrating your experience to match what feels normal. Not what is ideal, not what is possible, but what is familiar enough to manage without threat. If you are used to being overlooked, you may unconsciously tolerate environments where your voice is minimized. If you are used to earning love, you may feel drawn to people who require effort instead of offering presence. If you are used to instability, you may interpret consistency as something temporary or suspicious. And so, life begins to mirror that internal baseline with remarkable precision. Not as punishment, not as limitation, but as alignment. This is the deeper mechanism behind what many call attraction. You are not simply attracting what you think about. You are aligning with what your system has normalized as safe, which leads to a powerful realization. If your internal state defines your external patterns, then transformation is not about chasing a new reality. It is about becoming familiar with a new way of being. What if the very thing you've been chasing feels overwhelming not because it's too big, but because it's too unfamiliar? This is where many people misinterpret their own reactions. They assume that anxiety means something is wrong, that discomfort is a sign to pull back, that intensity means they are not ready. But what if that sensation is not danger, but expansion? Your nervous system does not measure possibility, it measures familiarity. So when your life begins to move beyond what you've known, even in a positive direction, your body may respond with tension, doubt, or the urge to retreat. Not because the opportunity is misaligned, but because it exists outside your current range of comfort. Have you ever noticed how receiving something you truly wanted can feel strangely destabilizing? More visibility brings pressure. More love brings vulnerability. More abundance brings responsibility. And if your system has been conditioned around limitation, these experiences can feel like too much, too fast. So instead of integrating them, you shrink them, you delay them, you unconsciously step away. This is not a failure of mindset. It is a mismatch between desire and capacity. And here is the key shift. Your life does not expand when you want more. It expands when your nervous system learns that more is safe to hold. What if you've been trying to attract a new life, while your body is still anchored in the past? This is where the deeper misunderstanding reveals itself. Most people believe that change happens through intention alone. They set goals, repeat affirmations, visualize outcomes. And while all of that is power, it often remains at the surface if the body is still responding from an old emotional blueprint. Because your nervous system does not live in the future. It lives in memory. It learns through repetition, through emotional intensity, through experiences that once shaped what felt safe or unsafe. And once those patterns are installed, they begin to operate automatically, without asking for your permission. So even as you think new thoughts, your body may still react in old ways. You say you want peace, but your system is wired for urgency. You say you want love, but your system anticipates loss. You say you want abundance, but your system expects scarcity. And in this invisible contradiction, reality stabilizes around the strongest signal, the one your body trusts the most. This is why mental effort alone often feels exhausting. You are trying to override something that was never created at the level of logic. So the real question becomes, can you teach your body that the future you desire is not a threat, but a place it can finally relax into? Why does the more you want something, the further away it sometimes seems to feel? At first, this sounds almost unfair. You are told to be clear about your desires, to feel them, to focus on them. And yet, there are moments when the more importance you place on something, the more tension you feel around it. The more you think about it, the less natural it becomes. This is not a failure of desire. It is a distortion of energy. When something becomes too important, your system stops relating to it as something accessible and starts treating it as something distant, elevated, almost out of reach. You place it on a pedestal, and in doing so, you unconsciously place yourself below it. And your nervous system feels that gap. It registers the difference between where you are and where you believe you need to be. That gap creates pressure. That pressure activates stress. And stress signals to your body that something is off, something is missing, something is not yet yours. So instead of moving toward your desire with ease, you begin to chase it with urgency. And chasing creates resistance. Because what you chase, you reinforce as separate from you. This is the subtle trap of wanting. Not because wanting is wrong, but because intense craving often carries the emotional signature of lack. And your system responds not to your words, but to the state you embody while desiring. What if the problem isn't that you don't have what you want, but that your system keeps reinforcing the feeling that you don't? This is where the mechanism becomes almost invisible, yet incredibly powerful. Because the moment you enter a state of, I need this, I have to get there, or this will finally make me feel complete, your body shifts into a subtle form of contraction. It may feel like motivation. It may even feel like determination. But underneath it, there is tension. There is urgency. There is a quiet message running in the background. Something is missing right now. And your nervous system organizes your experience around that signal. It does not interpret your desire as something already in motion. It interprets your emotional state as evidence of absence. So even as you take action, even as you move forward, the underlying frequency continues to point to lack. And reality mirrors that. This is why two people can pursue the same goal with similar effort and experience completely different outcomes. One moves with grounded certainty, as if what they seek is already becoming natural. The other moves with pressure, trying to compensate for something they feel they do not yet have. Same action, different state, different result. So the deeper question is not, how do I get what I want? It is, what am I emotionally confirming over and over again while I pursue it? What if the intensity you feel around your desires is the very thing keeping them out of reach? This is one of the most subtle dynamics in the process of co-creation, because intensity often disguises itself as passion, commitment, or focus. And while those qualities can be powerful, there is a threshold where intensity shifts into something else, something your nervous system interprets as pressure. And pressure does not expand your capacity. It contracts it. When your system is activated, when your thoughts are looping, your emotions are heightened, your body feels tight, you enter a state that prioritizes control over flow. In this state, you are no longer open. You are managing, anticipating, trying to force alignment rather than allowing it. And the body responds accordingly. Heart rate increases. Breath becomes shallow. Attention narrows. The system moves into a subtle form of survival mode, even if nothing is actually wrong. And from that state, receiving becomes difficult. Not because what you want is unavailable, but because your system is not in a position to hold it. This is why calm is not passive. Calm is capacity. It is the state in which your body is no longer defending, no longer bracing, no longer trying to control the outcome. It is the state where what you desire can begin to feel normal, integrated, and safe. So the question shifts again. Are you trying to force your reality into place? Or are you creating the internal conditions where it can finally arrive? What if the life you're trying to create can only exist inside a version of you that feels calm enough to receive it? This is where everything begins to integrate. Because until now, it may have seemed like the goal was to get something, more love, more success, more freedom. But the deeper truth is that your system is not measuring what you can get. It is measuring what you can hold. There is a difference. You can momentarily reach something through effort, chance, or external momentum. But if your internal state does not recognize it as safe, it will not stabilize. It will feel temporary, fragile, uncertain. And sooner or later, something will shift, subtly or dramatically, to bring you back to your baseline. This is why some people experience sudden gains followed by sudden losses. Not because they are incapable, but because their nervous system has not yet expanded to sustain that level of experience. So the real work is not in chasing the next result. It is in becoming the person for whom that result feels ordinary, not extraordinary, not overwhelming, not something to protect or fear, just natural. Because what feels natural does not trigger resistance, and what does not trigger resistance can remain. So instead of asking, how do I reach it? A more powerful question emerges. Can I become calm enough to let it stay? Why do so many people confuse connection with validation and call it love? This is where the pattern becomes deeply personal. Because what you seek in relationships is rarely just about the other person. It is about what your nervous system has learned to associate with being seen, valued, and safe. If, at some point in your life, love felt conditional, something you had to earn, prove, or maintain, then your system adapted. It learned that attention must be secured, that presence can disappear, that closeness requires effort. And so, without realizing it, you begin to seek not connection but confirmation. You are drawn to people who are slightly unavailable, inconsistent, or distant. Not because that is what you truly want, but because that emotional dynamic feels familiar. It activates the same internal pattern. If I can make this work, then I am worthy. But this is not love. It is a loop. A loop where your nervous system is trying to resolve something old through something new. And each time the pattern repeats, it reinforces the same emotional baseline. This is why genuine, stable connection can feel confusing at first. It doesn't trigger the same urgency. It doesn't demand effort. It doesn't activate the need to prove. It simply exists. And for a system wired to chase, that kind of ease can feel unfamiliar, almost too quiet to trust. What if the way you experience love, success, and even rejection was programmed long before you became aware of it? This is where the roots of your patterns begin to reveal themselves. Because your nervous system did not develop in isolation. It was shaped in environments, in relationships, in repeated emotional experiences that taught you what to expect from life. As a child, you were not analyzing reality. You were absorbing it. You learned what love feels like by how it was given. You learned what safety means by how consistent or inconsistent your environment was. You learned what you are worth by how you were seen, heard, or overlooked. And your body remembered. Not as stories, but as sensations. So, if love was unpredictable, your system learned to stay alert. If approval had to be earned, your system learned to perform. If emotions were dismissed, your system learned to suppress. These patterns did not disappear as you grew older. They became automatic. They shaped how you respond, what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you unconsciously recreate. Even when your conscious mind says, I want something different, your body continues to operate from what it learned early on. And this is not a flaw. It is intelligence. Your system adapted to survive. But now, the question becomes, are you still living from what you needed back then? Or are you ready to redefine what feels safe today? Why do the same emotional patterns keep showing up even when your circumstances change? This is where many people feel confused. They change environments, relationships, jobs, even entire lifestyles, yet something familiar keeps resurfacing. Different faces, different settings, but the same emotional experience underneath. It can feel like bad luck, like coincidence, like something external that keeps repeating. But what if the repetition isn't outside of you? What if it's internal, being expressed through new forms? Your nervous system doesn't just remember what happened, it remembers how it felt. And more importantly, it keeps searching for situations that recreate that feeling, because that is what it knows how to process. So even as your life evolves, your internal blueprint remains active. You may leave one relationship, only to meet someone who triggers the same emotional response. You may escape one stressful environment, only to recreate pressure in a new way. Not intentionally, but automatically, because your system is trying to resolve what was never fully processed. This is the loop of emotional familiarity. Not because you are choosing the same outcomes consciously, but because your body is gravitating toward what it recognizes. And until that internal pattern is seen clearly, it will continue to express itself, quietly, persistently, through every new chapter you enter. So the deeper question becomes, are you changing your life or repeating it in different forms? What if your attachment to struggle is the very thing preventing you from experiencing ease? This can be difficult to accept because no one consciously chooses hardship. And yet, over time, certain emotional states become so familiar that they start to feel like part of your identity. You get used to pushing, to proving, to constantly doing more just to feel enough. And without realizing it, struggle becomes your reference point. You measure your value through effort. You associate productivity with worth. You feel uneasy when things slow down, when there is space, when nothing is demanding your attention. In those moments, instead of relaxing, your system searches for something to fix, improve, or control, because stillness feels unfamiliar. And what feels unfamiliar often feels unsafe. So even when life offers you moments of ease, you may unconsciously override them. You create new pressure. You take on more than necessary. You fill the silence with activity, not because you need to, but because your system has been conditioned to equate tension with normality. This is how struggle becomes addictive, not in a conscious way, but as a deeply ingrained pattern of being. And here is the shift that changes everything. Ease is not something you earn after enough effort. It is something your nervous system must learn how to tolerate. Because if peace feels unnatural, you will always find a way back to chaos. Why does receiving something that should feel natural sometimes feel uncomfortable, even undeserved? This is one of the quietest blocks, yet one of the most powerful. Because while many people focus on how to get more, very few examine their relationship with actually receiving. Receiving requires openness. It requires allowing. It requires a kind of internal permission that says, This can be mine without struggle, without justification, without over-explanation. And for many, that feels unfamiliar. If your system has been conditioned to earn everything, attention, love, recognition, even rest, then receiving without effort can feel destabilizing. It can trigger subtle thoughts like, do I deserve this? Should I be doing more? What if this is taken away? And those thoughts are not random. They are signals. Signals that your nervous system associates value with effort, not with being. So when something arrives with ease, instead of relaxing into it, your system becomes alert. It looks for a reason, a cost, a condition attached. And if it doesn't find one, it creates one. This is why people sometimes complicate what was simple or give away what they just received. Not because they don't want it, but because they haven't yet become comfortable holding it. So the deeper question is no longer, how do I get more? It becomes, can I allow myself to receive without needing to prove that I've earned it first? What if the pressure you feel in your life is no longer coming from the outside, but from within you? This is a subtle turning point, because at some stage, even after changing environments, gaining more freedom, or stepping into new opportunities, many people notice something unexpected. The pressure doesn't disappear. It follows them, not because life is demanding more, but because the internal pattern that once responded to external pressure has now become self-generated. The voice that once came from outside, expectations, standards, urgency, has been internalized. It continues the same rhythm, even when the original source is no longer present. And so, without realizing it, you recreate the same state. You push yourself when no one is asking you to. You rush when there is no real urgency. You set standards that feel impossible to meet. It feels like discipline. It feels like responsibility. But underneath it, there is tension. There is a constant sense of not enough, even when everything is objectively fine. This is the nervous system trying to maintain a familiar level of activation, because stillness, again, feels unfamiliar. So instead of relaxing into your current reality, you recreate the pressure you once learned to survive. And here lies a powerful realization. Freedom is not just the absence of external demands. It is the ability to exist without recreating them internally. What if letting go is not about losing control, but about releasing the tension that was never allowing things to flow? This is where the shift begins to feel different, because up to this point, it may have seemed like everything requires effort, managing, fixing, controlling, anticipating. But what if the very act of holding so tightly is what has been creating resistance? Detachment is often misunderstood. It is not indifference. It is not giving up. It is not pretending you don't care. It is the ability to care without gripping. When you release urgency, something subtle changes inside your system. The pressure softens. The need to force an outcome begins to dissolve. And in that space, your body starts to move out of survival mode and into regulation. This is where flow becomes possible, because what you no longer cling to, you no longer distort. You allow it to approach naturally, without the emotional charge that once pushed it away. And this is why the state of "I'm good either way" is so powerful. Not because it means you don't desire something, but because your well-being is no longer dependent on its arrival. You're no longer sending a signal of lack. You are grounded, stable, open. And from that state, you don't chase. You receive, not by effort, but by alignment. What if the most powerful state you could embody is the quiet certainty that you are already okay, no matter what happens? This is where true regulation begins. Not in forcing yourself to feel positive, not in denying your desires, but in reaching a state where your inner stability is no longer dependent on external outcomes. "I'm good either way" is not a phrase of resignation. It is a declaration of internal safety. When your nervous system reaches this state, something profound happens. The urgency dissolves. The pressure fades. The constant monitoring of "is it here yet?" begins to quiet down. And in that silence, your system finally has space to recalibrate. Because now you are no longer trying to extract security from the future. You are generating it within the present. And this changes how you move. You no longer cling to people to feel valued. You no longer rush outcomes to feel in control. You no longer interpret delays as threats. Instead, you begin to experience a grounded neutrality. Not emptiness, but steadiness. A sense that whatever unfolds, you have the capacity to meet it without collapsing. And from this place, your energy becomes different. It is no longer charged with need. It is stable, open, and quietly magnetic. Because when you are no longer trying to get something to feel okay, you become the kind of presence that naturally allows things to come. What if the foundation of everything you're trying to build is not excitement, but calm? This may feel counterintuitive at first. We often associate transformation with intensity, strong emotions, powerful motivation, moments of breakthrough. And while those moments can initiate change, they are not what sustains it. Excitement is unstable. It rises quickly, peaks, and fades. It depends on circumstances, on novelty, on external stimulation. And when it fades, many people interpret that as a loss of alignment, a sign that something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. You're simply moving from activation into regulation. And regulation is where stability is built. Calm is not dull. It is not passive. It is not a lack of energy. Calm is coherence. It is a state in which your thoughts, emotions, and body are no longer pulling in different directions. It is where your system is not reacting, not resisting, not overcompensating. It is grounded, steady, and available. And from this state, everything becomes more sustainable. Love is no longer overwhelming. It is consistent. Success is no longer stressful. It is integrated. Abundance is no longer fragile. It is maintained. Because your system is no longer fluctuating between extremes. It is stable enough to hold what once felt too much. So instead of chasing emotional highs, the real question becomes, can you trust the quiet power of calm as the new foundation of your life? What if everything you've been seeking has been waiting for one simple condition, that you finally feel safe enough to receive it? This is where all the pieces come together. Not as a technique, not as something to force, but as a shift in understanding. Because up until now, it may have felt like life is something you must pursue, control, or earn. But in truth, life responds to the state you embody. And the state that changes everything is not effort, it is safety. When your nervous system feels safe, you stop bracing. You stop anticipating loss. You stop tightening around outcomes. Your body softens. Your breath deepens. Your awareness expands. And in that openness, something subtle yet powerful begins to happen. You become receptive. Not in a passive way, but in an aligned way. You are no longer blocking what you desire through tension, urgency, or resistance. You are no longer signaling that what you want is distant or overwhelming. You are signaling that it belongs. And this is the moment where co-creation becomes real. Because the universe does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you are ready to hold without fear. So the final question is not, how do I get there? It is, am I safe enough to let it become my reality? What if the moment you realize I am not my patterns is the moment your life begins to change? This is where true separation begins, not from your life, but from the automatic responses that have been running it. Because until now, many of your reactions may have felt like you. Your fears, your doubts, your impulses, your emotional swings, they seemed personal, fixed, almost defining. But what if they are not your identity? What if they are learned responses repeating themselves through your nervous system? The moment you begin to observe instead of immediately react, something shifts. There is space, a subtle gap between what you feel and what you choose to do with it. You notice the urge to pull away, but you don't follow it automatically. You feel the tension, but you don't let it dictate your next move. You recognize the old story, but you don't reinforce it. This is awareness, and awareness is power. Not because it controls your experience, but because it frees you from being controlled by it. You begin to see that your patterns are not permanent. They are practiced, and anything that has been practiced can be changed, not through force, but through presence. So the question becomes, if you are not your patterns, then who are you when you no longer follow them? What if the first step to changing your reality is learning to listen to your body instead of overriding it? Most people move through life from the mind, thinking, analyzing, deciding. And while the mind is powerful, it often misses the most immediate feedback system you have, your body. Your nervous system is constantly communicating with you, not in words, but in sensations, expansion, contraction, lightness, tightness, openness, resistance. Every desire you hold creates a response, and that response tells you something deeper than your thoughts ever could. It reveals whether your system perceives that desire as safe or as a potential threat. But here's the problem. Most people don't notice, or if they do, they ignore it. They push through tension. They override discomfort. They convince themselves that force is necessary. And in doing so, they disconnect from the very system that is guiding their capacity to receive. So the shift begins with awareness. The next time you think about something you want, pause. Notice what happens in your body. Does it soften or tighten? Does your breath deepen or become shallow? Do you feel open or guarded? This is your signal. Not something to judge, not something to fix, but something to understand. Because your transformation does not begin with changing your life. It begins with learning to feel it. What if you could shift your entire state simply by learning how to return your body to calm? This is where change becomes practical, not abstract. Because once you begin to recognize your body's signals, the next step is not to analyze them endlessly. It is to respond to them. Your nervous system is dynamic. It can move from contraction to openness, from tension to ease, from activation to regulation. But it needs a bridge. And that bridge is not thought. It is presence. Simple, consistent, grounded actions that tell your body you are safe right now. Your breath slows and your system follows. Your body softens and your mind begins to quiet. Your attention returns to the present and the future loses its grip. These are not small changes. They are signals that shift your entire internal environment. Because when your system is regulated, your perception changes. You stop interpreting everything as urgent or threatening. You gain access to clarity, to choice, to a sense of control that is not forced, but natural. And from this state, your actions become different. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of repeat. This is how reprogramming begins. Not through intensity, but through consistency. So instead of asking, how do I fix everything at once? A new question emerges. How often can I return to calm? What if your desires could become easier to receive the moment they stop feeling overwhelming? This is where a subtle but powerful shift takes place. Because until now, your desires may have carried a certain emotional weight, excitement mixed with pressure, hope mixed with fear, anticipation mixed with doubt. And that combination creates instability. Your system does not know how to process something that feels both desirable and threatening at the same time. So instead of moving toward it with ease, it hesitates. It delays. It creates distance. But what happens when you begin to link your desires with calm? Everything changes. You no longer approach what you want with urgency. You no longer feel like you need it to arrive in order to feel complete. Instead, you begin to experience it internally, without pressure, without intensity. You visualize it, but your body remains relaxed. You think about it, but your breath stays steady. You imagine it, and it feels normal, not overwhelming. This is the moment your nervous system begins to reclassify your desire, not as something distant or risky, but as something familiar, safe, and possible. And this is what allows integration, because what feels calm can be received. So the question becomes, can you allow what you want to feel simple instead of significant? Because sometimes what changes everything is not adding more energy. It is removing the pressure. What if you didn't need to leap into a completely new life, but simply allow yourself to experience it in small, safe moments? This is where transformation becomes sustainable. Many people believe change requires a dramatic shift, a sudden breakthrough, a complete reinvention. But for the nervous system, drastic change often feels overwhelming. And what feels overwhelming is usually rejected. So instead of expanding, you contract. But gradual exposure creates a different response. When you introduce new experiences slowly, moments of ease, moments of receiving, moments of being supported, your system has time to adjust. It begins to recognize that what once felt unfamiliar is not a threat. It learns. A small moment of calm becomes acceptable. A small moment of success becomes normal. A small moment of love becomes safe. And with repetition, those small moments begin to build. This is how your capacity expands, not through force, but through familiarity. You are teaching your body, step by step, that a new way of living is not only possible, but sustainable. And over time, what once felt distant begins to feel natural. This is the true process of reprogramming, not jumping into a new reality all at once, but gently becoming the version of yourself who no longer needs to resist it. What if the reason your desires haven't fully arrived is because they still feel emotionally charged instead of natural? This is one of the most overlooked thresholds in transformation, because most people believe that strong emotion accelerates manifestation. And in some ways, it does when that emotion is aligned, stable, and grounded. But when emotion becomes excessive, it creates distortion. If something feels too exciting, too important, too life-changing, your system does not relax into it. It elevates it. It places it above your current identity. And in doing so, it reinforces the idea that it is not yet yours. This is why emotional neutrality is so powerful, not because it removes desire, but because it stabilizes it. When something you want begins to feel normal, no longer overwhelming, no longer distant, your body stops resisting it. It no longer treats it as something outside your range. It becomes part of your internal baseline. And what becomes part of your baseline can be sustained. This is the shift from chasing to allowing. You no longer feel like you need to reach for it. You feel like you can live with it. And this is where the gap closes. Because your system is no longer signaling separation. It is signaling readiness. So the question becomes, Can you let what you want feel ordinary enough to finally become yours? What if gratitude is not just appreciation, but a mechanism that collapses the distance between you and what you desire? Most people think of gratitude as something you practice after receiving, a response to what is already present. But in reality, gratitude is a state that signals completion. When you feel genuine gratitude, your body does not interpret your experience as lacking. It interprets it as sufficient. And that shift matters more than it seems. Because when your system moves out of lack and into sufficiency, it stops searching, grasping, and anticipating. It settles. It stabilizes. It begins to resonate with the feeling of already having, rather than still needing. This is why gratitude changes your perception so quickly. It softens urgency. It reduces resistance. It brings your attention back to what is, instead of what is missing. And in doing so, it aligns your internal state with the experience you are trying to create. Not through force, but through coherence. Because the body cannot simultaneously feel grateful and deprived at the same depth. So the more you practice this state, not as a ritual but as a genuine experience, the more your system begins to accept that life is already moving in your favor. And when that becomes your baseline, you are no longer waiting. You are participating. What if your nervous system determines not just what you can attract, but what you can actually keep? This is where the conversation becomes deeper, more honest, and far more empowering. Because many people have already experienced moments where something they wanted finally arrived, an opportunity, a relationship, a breakthrough, and yet it didn't last. At first, it may seem like coincidence, like timing, like something external shifted. But what if the real factor was internal capacity? Receiving is one thing, sustaining is another. Your nervous system is constantly regulating how much you can hold without becoming overwhelmed. And when something exceeds that capacity, too much attention, too much responsibility, too much change, it creates internal instability. And instability seeks resolution. So you might unconsciously reduce what you have. You pull back, you disengage, you create distance, or you make decisions that bring you back to a more familiar level of experience. Not because you don't want more, but because your system doesn't yet feel safe maintaining it. This is why growth must be integrated, not rushed. Because if your internal capacity does not expand along with your external results, those results will feel temporary. So the question becomes, are you focused on getting more? Or are you expanding your ability to hold more without losing yourself in the process? What if the true magnetism you've been searching for has nothing to do with effort and everything to do with calm? This is the point where everything simplifies. Because after all the techniques, all the strategies, all the attempts to align and improve and become, what remains is not complexity but coherence. Magnetism is not created by chasing, convincing, or proving. It is created by stability. When your nervous system is regulated, your presence changes. You are no longer projecting urgency, need, or tension. You are not trying to extract something from the moment. You are simply available to it. And that availability is powerful. People feel it. Opportunities respond to it. Life organizes around it, not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer interfering. This is the paradox. The less you force, the more things begin to move. The less you cling, the more things begin to stay. The less you try to control, the more life begins to cooperate. Because your system is no longer sending mixed signals. It is clear. It is steady. It is open. And that clarity becomes magnetic. So instead of asking, how do I attract more into my life? A deeper question emerges. What happens when I become so calm that what I desire no longer feels separate from me? What if you were never meant to chase your life, but to become safe enough to live it? This is the final shift, the one that quietly transforms everything you've understood so far. Because at the beginning, it may have felt like the path was about doing more, becoming more, fixing something, reaching somewhere. But now you can see it differently. Your life has not been waiting for more effort. It has been waiting for more safety. Safety in your body. Safety in your emotions. Safety in your ability to remain grounded, even when things expand. Because when safety is present, you stop resisting what is good. You stop questioning what is flowing. You stop shrinking when life begins to open. You allow it. And that changes everything. You no longer see love as something fragile. You experience it as stable. You no longer see success as pressure. You hold it as natural. You no longer see abundance as distant. You live it as familiar. Because you are no longer trying to reach a different life. You are becoming the version of yourself who can exist within it without fear. And in that moment, something profound happens. The chase ends. The resistance dissolves. And what once felt far away, quietly becomes your reality. If this message spoke to something deep within you, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps this work reach more people and reminds you to keep showing up for your own transformation. And if you felt a shift today, don't ignore it. That's where everything begins.